The BBC has obtained and verified footage showing civilians being killed by the Taliban in Afghanistan. We've been able to confirm that more than 20 people have been killed in Panjshir province, where the Taliban have been fighting opposition forces. A Taliban spokesperson has denied such killings are taking place. And a warning, you may find some details in my report distressing. This is Roha Bazaar, famous across Panjshir Valley and always bustling. Now it's empty and a ghost town. Since the Taliban entered the valley, people have taken flight. It used to be the home of resistance, but this now appears futile. People have locked their doors and fled. And that's not surprising when people are being shot dead on the side of the street. The BBC has verified this video. Here, a man in military clothes is dragged away. It's unclear whether he was in the army. This is common dress in the valley. Voices are raised. Seconds later, he's shot several times and killed. We're not showing you those images. A bystander insists the man they've just killed was not in the military. The BBC has confirmed that more than 20 people have been killed since the Taliban entered Panjshir province. One of them was this shopkeeper and father of two called Abdul Sameh. His family want his name and story to be known. A Taliban spokesperson denies civilians are being targeted. When the Taliban entered the valley, they promised peace and stability.
They should come out, do their daily activities. If they are shopkeepers, they can go to their shops. If they are farmers, they can go to their farms. We are here to protect them, their lives and their families.
But these pictures show that people are not waiting to see if the Taliban keep their promises. With telecommunications cut in the valley, it's hard to get information out. But the international community has warned the Taliban they are watching, and they will be held accountable for their actions. OK, that was my report there about the Panjshir Valley. Let's go to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who joins us live from Kabul. And Lise, over to you.
Yes, another appeal coming from Geneva today, chaired by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, appealing to the world to help Afghanistans, no matter who's in charge, in the midst of a deepening humanitarian crisis. So many Afghans at the end of the month may not know where to get their next meal. Even before the Taliban took power here in Kabul, Afghanistan was facing the aftermath of a record drought, displacement, of course, displacement also by the fighting and deepening hunger. Antonio Guterres appealed today for $600 million just for the last few months of this year. But there's a separate appeal of $300 million to help neighbouring countries like Iran and Pakistan. 9 out of 10 Afghan refugees are living in neighbouring countries. We're joined here in Kabul by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi. Filippo Grandi, good to have you here in Kabul. Let's first talk about the displaced people. 3.5 million Afghans displaced by conflict, and the number is growing?
Inside the country, yes, 3.5 million, of whom 500,000 just in the next few weeks and months, in dire need of everything. This is one of the #1 humanitarian priorities in the country, which today's appeals aims at covering. And it's very important to stabilize this population because otherwise it can grow into a bigger displacement, which could also reach the borders and try and outflow in neighboring countries.
But now that fighting has stopped in pretty well all of Afghanistan, except for some pockets, are displaced people able, willing to go back to their villages, back to their cities?
I see it in two ways. Yes, if security progresses, and indeed we seem to have more access to many parts of Afghanistan today than even we had a few months ago, then we will see people going back. We've seen about 100,000 already go back to their homes, so we need to follow that trend and see what we can do to strengthen it. But if the social and economic fabric of the country collapses, and we all know that the risks are very high, then I foresee additional and even massive displacement inside and outside the country. I think it's almost inevitable. That's why that social and economic piece, the financial piece, difficult as it may be politically, is of absolute priority as humanitarian assistance.
And many Afghans, I mean, even before this crisis intensified, so Afghans were making up a huge percentage of the number of people fleeing, trying to get asylum, trying to find a place of refuge. There are predictions they will keep trying to go across whatever border they can to get out of Afghanistan.
And this is why we know that neighboring countries are tired. They have hosted Afghan refugees, generations of Afghan refugees for 42 years. But it is important that if people knock at their door, we will make a plea again. Please keep those doors open. And to the international community, help those countries, not just for the new arrivals, but for the millions that live and have lived for a long time in Pakistan, Iran, but also Turkey and other countries.
In order to help the people of Afghanistan, the international community is confronting a big question now. How do you work with the new caretaker Taliban cabinet, many of whom are on US or UN blacklists? You had your first meetings today. How did their discussions go?
I heard good commitments to protecting humanitarian operations, ensuring access to all those in needs. This is very important. And I think it is important to engage with the Taliban leadership, both centrally and in the provinces. I'm trying to go to Mazar-e-Sharif in a couple of days, because it's through engagement that we can ensure the effectiveness of our delivery. But through that engagement, we also create a space in which we can raise more complex issues, issues of rights, issues of minorities, issues of women, issues of education.
But do they really have the capacity to deliver to the population? Having just come in, the country is in ruin after months of decades of war, but months of intensified fighting.
What I heard today already in my first few meetings is that there is a very clear awareness that that capacity is lacking, and therefore they will rely on the existing civil service.
Is it in place? I mean, so
and
many left.
And they will rely on the
fear.
international community. But the big problem at the moment is how to run it, how to manage it, and how to pay for it. These are the difficult, complex issues that I was alluding to.
And they're not just humanitarian, they are so political. The World Bank, for example, has stopped all the funding for the health services, and therefore there's a warning that in 31 of 34 provinces there may be no health service because people won't be getting paid, because big financial institutions have conditions which mean they cannot work with this new government.
I think that if the international community really wants to prevent a humanitarian crisis of major proportions from happening in this country, to prevent a major displacement and refugee crisis from happening, we need to examine very carefully those conditions and apply them in an intelligent, in a smart and judicious way. And dialogue with the Taliban themselves will be key in this respect.
You've been coming to Afghanistan for many, many years. You were resident here in Kabul years ago. Have you ever seen the humanitarian situation as bad as this?
It is certainly one of the times in which we've seen it worst. But I'm even more worried for what is to come if all these things are not done urgently, substantively, and properly.
Have you had any messages from major donors before you came?
Yes, I left the conference as it was still going on. We will hear tonight what are the results. But in general, in recent days, I've got many messages from many donor governments, rather positive, especially on the humanitarian side, which is urgent, number one emergency, let's say. The rest is more complex, but I hope it will come.
And Filippo Grande, you had a refugee crisis regarding Afghanistan even before this intensified crisis, that Europe was closing its doors. Now Europe again is confronting an even bigger wave of Afghan refugees with even, they believe, greater reason to flee. Are you anticipating that to be a crisis in the months to come? Who will help the Afghans?
Here I have to speak as the High Commissioner for Refugees. It saddens me to hear so many countries say that they will not allow Afghans on their territory. Yet, look at the outpouring of solidarity that we saw for Afghan people when they were trying to run after planes and to get out of the country.
The military flights.
The military flights from Kabul airport. So that solidarity that was expressed is the same that we ask, that you express, all of you, when people, the same people, will come possibly knocking at your door. So if it comes to that, that solidarity will be needed.
Are you already putting in place the dialogue to anticipate?
For sure. But I think at the moment the priority, and I agree with everybody on that, is to help people here, to avoid the catastrophe so that we don't have to deal once again, like in 2015, with a multi-country refugee flow that has so many political implications that it becomes almost impossible to handle.
Filippo Grandi, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, thank you very much for joining us here in Kabul, underlining again, if it needed, underline the depth of the humanitarian crisis here. 3.5 million Afghans displaced internally, and so many more trying to flee into neighbouring countries as winter approaches. Even before this crisis, nearly half of the population of Afghanistan was relying on humanitarian assistance. That number grows by the day in the midst of this economic and financial crisis after the Taliban took charge. We're going to continue to follow all the developments here from Kabul, but back to you in London.